Hello there everyone, it's Monday the 19th of February. I'm Russ Mclean, Chair of the Patient Voices Group, and today I've come to the Royal Blackburn Teaching Hospital to speak to East Lancashire Hospitals Trust Chief Executive Mr Kevin Mcgee. Kevin, hello.
Afternoon, Russ.
Now, I'd like to begin today by finding out more about the Pathology collaboration project and the rumours that two-thirds of pathology testing may move to Lancaster. Now, to give some context to our listeners, your blood sciences department receives approximately 160,000 samples every month. Now, on those samples, of course, multiple tests are often performed. And so, are local services going to be moved? And what is the collaboration project?
So there are no definitive answers at this point. It's true that there is a national piece of work looking to see how we can rationalise pathology services and make them more effective, because they're very costly services, but also there are issues in terms of workforce shortages for the future. So there's a national piece of work going on that said trusts need to collaborate and support one another in providing these services. We've been working in collaboration with Blackpool, with Preston and with Morecambe Bay to look at how these services could be better run in the future. Now, first thing to say is we have brilliant pathology services. We don't have any problems in terms of recruitment, and the staff that we've got and the services that we run are absolutely first rate. The other three areas have been working for some time, and it is true that they're looking to collaborate, and they are one of the options they are considering. It's only an option at this point, is that they will centralise some services in Lancaster. We have yet not made any decision on that. We have to look at it, we have to see whether it's right for our population and for our patients and for our staff, and make a decision. But we have, as an organisation, as a board, have not made any decision yet to move any of those services. We will look to see what's right, and we may have to make some difficult decisions, but we've not done so yet, as I say, and we are in a slightly different position because we cover a big geographical area. Part of the issues in terms of pathology is making sure you can get your results back quickly. So if we became part of the project, it would have different implications in terms of transport. So we're looking at it, but absolutely no decisions have been made yet.
I mean, you know, obviously the obvious inference is that if it moves to Lancaster, people might have to wait longer to get results. And 160,000 samples on average is a hell of a lot of sampling.
Well, that's what I mean. If we're involved, transport then becomes of a different issue altogether. And, you know, we are a big area. We have a big population, nearly 600,000. We cover a big geographical area, and we might get a different outcome.
A recent Freedom of Information request has highlighted the rise in the number of sepsis cases in maternity patients. And you and I have spoken about sepsis in a previous blog, but Kevin, aren't you worried about the rise in cases? And why is it particularly the maternity department showing the rise? And what are you doing to protect patients?
So I think this is actually probably something of a good news story, in that what we are doing is actually screening patients more. So every patient that comes into the organisation now is actually screened for sepsis, and we can detect it much quicker. And by detecting it quicker, we can record it and then put the appropriate care in place. I think what has happened historically across the NHS generally is that patients have come in, and because there hasn't been a comprehensive screening for sepsis, some patients may have been missed. So the numbers have gone up, but that's not necessarily a bad thing if it means we're capturing patients quicker, we're recording those patients quicker, and we're treating those patients quicker. And I think that's what we're seeing in the increase in these numbers.
And isn't it right, as far as I understand it, that you've actually got dedicated sepsis teams now here at the Trust?
We have. We've invested in staff and in equipment, and we are much more au fait with the signs of sepsis, how to treat sepsis, so that if anybody comes, as I said, they will be screened. If there's any signs of sepsis, then the treatment will start very quickly, and that's clearly better for patients.
Now, it was recently revealed that the employment contracts of thousands of NHS non-clinical staff could be transferred to subsidiary companies under plans being drawn up by hospital trusts. First of all, are you one of those trusts that's aiming to do that?
We haven't done that, and the number of trusts have been identified as looking at these plans. We are not yet one of those trusts.
Currently, more than 3,000 estates and facilities staff are employed by various trust-owned subsidiaries, with the majority having transferred from parent trusts. There are plans, it is said, to transfer a further 8,000 staff by trusts across the country. This entails significant VAT benefits and, of course, generating estates income as well. But I think the fear is that this is forcing NHS staff out of NHS employment. What are your feelings on that?
And I do understand that, and I do understand people's concerns. As I said, this is not something we've looked at, so it's not something I know, if you like, the intricacies about, because as I said, it's something that we've not considered at this point. It is fair to say that we have to look at all options in terms of how we can make savings, but I would not want to make those savings at the expense of our staff and to the detriment of care. So it's something that we would need to consider, but we would need to consider very carefully.
Well, staying with workforce, the number of managers working in NHS trusts has increased by more than a quarter since 2013, and we already know that there's been a dramatic increase in the number of clerical and administrative staff, which is a separate group to managers. But patients hear this, Kevin, they hear about the NHS in financial crisis, and the perception is that there may be too many managers and not enough clinical staff. Many patients tell me that trusts should get rid of their managers and employ more doctors and nurses. What would you say to those people?
So I would say two separate things. Firstly, if you look at what we've invested over the last 3.5 years, it's primarily been in additional clinical staff, and that's primarily doctors and nurses, and we put an awful lot of investment into those areas to get safe staffing on wards and to really improve the quality of the services that they've delivered. So all of our investment has been into clinical staff, and we can say that absolutely without reservation. But I would say that if you look at the NHS generally and you look at us in comparison to international standards, we are actually undermanaged in terms of the number of managers and administrative staff that are in post. And you know what? Every manager that's in post, every admin staff that's in post, their remit is to work in the service to improve patient care and to deliver patient services, even if it's not directly to patients. So you do need a level of management that's good, and in fact, if you don't have a proper level of management, you don't invest in management, you don't have the right management and leadership skills, actually you don't get the best health care. So this is a difficult one. We do need to make sure that most of our resources are directed at frontline care. We do need to employ more doctors and nurses, but we also need the appropriate managers and leaders in the organisations as well.
Recent figures have shown that regionally, 9 out of 10 nursing vacancies remain unfilled in the North West, with ELHT, or East Lancashire Hospitals Trust, currently advertising 415 posts. Now, given that the NHS is desperately short of nurses and that your trust has a high number of vacancies, how can your board assure patients that we have a safe staffing level on all your wards across the trust?
So recruitment and retention is a big issue, particularly for nurses and in some medical areas nationally. And it's fair to say that we know some of the workforce planning, there are gaps and there are vacancies, and there are not enough doctors and nurses coming through in certain areas. It's a national problem. We work very hard, as with every other trust, to make sure that we have safe staffing on every shift, on every ward, on every day in this hospital. And if you were to go out into the wards and departments now, you would see staff working incredibly hard trying to fill any gaps and vacancies that we have. Where there are gaps and vacancies, we have to employ short-term staff to cover those roles and to cover those responsibilities, or we might ask staff to do overtime. And we do, in the majority of cases, have the appropriate staffing on all our wards, and if we don't and there's a gap, then we'll move staff accordingly to make sure that we do. But it is a challenge. It's a national challenge, and it's a challenge that we're not immune from. One of the issues from my perspective is to make sure that we are recognised as a good place to work. So that's why, working with staff, investing in staff, supporting staff is really important. Staff morale is really important. And that's why our reputation is important, and it really distresses me when people talk the organisation and our system down, because we want to be the best health and social care system we can. We want to offer the best opportunities for staff, and we want staff to come and work here. And when people talk our services down, it does us all a disservice.
You're currently building more car park capacity with another 500 spaces in the pipeline. We have spoken about this car park before, but is everything proceeding as you've planned, and when is it due to open?
So yes, everything is proceeding. It should be open within the next couple of months. So really motoring on very quickly on this. And we will continue to look at car parking Whether it's right or whether it's wrong, car parking demands seem to increase every year. It's just the society that we live in. And so we need to make sure that our spaces and our capacity keeps up with that demand. So yes, there will be new car parking spaces coming on stream shortly, and we will continue to look at this.
Staying with car parking, an announcement has been made about 100 new spaces at Burnley General Teaching Hospital. There seems to be a lot of work going on there. What's happening?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting in terms of the work that we're doing on the Burnley site. So if you think about it, there's been massive investment over the last sort of 2 years. We've opened a new elective care centre, we've opened a new chemotherapy unit, we've opened a new breast surgery unit, and then we've then got our next phase, which is new outpatients and new ophthalmic theatres. So significant capital investment has gone on the Burnley site and is going on the Burnley site. And it's a real statement of our intent. Burnley and the services from Burnley are really important to the people of East Lancashire. They will continue to be provided there, and we will continue to invest in that site because it's really important for us.
Well, let's stay with car parking. I've had a question in that you recently changed your policy on disabled parking. You're not an outlier in that. Many trusts across the country have, but with that group now having to pay for the parking, and I think they should, many patients and their relatives aren't happy at having to pay at all. You see, in Scotland and parts of Wales, hospital parking is free. So, Kevin, why are patients in England having to pay to visit their relatives? And in fact, why are staff being charged to come to work? It might not be a common fact, but staff are charged by monthly direct debit to come to work and park.
So whether it's right or wrong, the policy in England is that staff and patients are charged for car parking. That's something that we've had for many years. What we try and do in East Lancashire Hospitals Trust is to keep those charges to both staff and to patients as low as possible. And if you look at our charges, both in comparison to local hospitals, but also in comparison nationally, they are low. So we recognise it's a national policy in England. We have to charge, we do charge, but we try and keep those prices as low as practically possible. And we do offer concessions to patients and their relatives who use the hospital site on a long-term basis, such as patients who need cancer or chemotherapy services.
One of the other questions I've had about the car parking is what happens to all the money? If people could perhaps be certain that those monies would be spent on frontline clinical services, they may be more amenable to those charges. But isn't it true that your car parks are run by a French company and that the monies are paid to their shareholders?
So, I mean, as some of your listeners will know, we are a private finance initiative hospital, and car parking is run as a commercial enterprise. However, I have to say, the majority of the income that we get from car parking goes back into improving car parking, i.e. increasing spaces, increasing security, increasing lighting. So it's not all taken off. In fact, the majority of the income we receive goes back into running those car parks and improving those car parks.
Public Health England are calling for all hospitals to encourage the use of e-cigarettes. What are your views as a chief executive on that?
Well, if I can, I'd like to talk about smoking generally. And I receive a number of complaints from people who are non-smokers who run the gauntlet of people smoking on the site. We are a non-smoking hospital, and it's something we are actively going to pursue. We're going to try and support smokers as much as possible, such as use of e-cigarettes and nicotine patches, etc., and to provide support for non-smoking. But at some point we really are going to have to enforce the no smoking rule on this site, because I think it's really inappropriate that staff and patients and relatives who don't smoke have to go through the gauntlet of people smoking at our main entrances and exits.
On the 5th of July 2018, the NHS will celebrate its 70th birthday. Now, of course, you haven't worked in the NHS for that long, not quite, but you have worked in it for a number of years. And during that time, how would you say that the NHS has changed for you personally? And as a chief executive here at East Lancashire Hospitals Trust, how positive are you that your trust will be able to continue to deliver those safe, personal, effective care to the residents of Pennine, Lancashire, well into the future?
So I do think the NHS has changed for the better. You would not always think that when you hear some of the stories in the local press and the negativity. But if you think that the work that we've done in terms of improving staffing, there's far more doctors and nurses now working in the NHS than there ever were, and they're far better trained. And if you think about the push that we've had on patient safety, so we talked an example before about sepsis. Look at the mortality statistics, they've come right down. So I think the NHS is a much safer organisation than it's ever been. But the nature of healthcare is you never completely eliminate risk, and there will always be some degree of risk in healthcare. What we've got to do is continue to improve the services and continue to invest in the services. I am a great believer in the NHS. I'm passionate about the NHS. I've worked in the NHS all my career. All my family, relatives received treatment in the NHS. And I think it's the most precious thing in this country. So I am very optimistic for the future. Yes, we've got our challenges. Yes, there are issues in terms of funding and the demands that are placed on the NHS. But you know what? We've got to continue to do what's right for our patients. We've got to continue to deliver first-class care. And if I was ill, I'd want to be treated nowhere else but in England for the NHS.
You know, you and I talk about this virtually every blog that we do, but isn't it a case that patients need to be better educated by central and local governments about the appropriate use of their services, both in health and social care?
I'm sure that's the case, and I think the next big development that we'll see is about actually people taking more responsibility for their own health and well-being. So what we see in terms of the hospitals now is that the population that we see is getting more elderly, but not necessarily becoming more healthy. So you get lots of people who come in with very many comorbidities. And I think the next big push that we should have is to keep people out of hospitals for as long as possible and to keep them fit, healthy and wealthy in their own locations. And that's partly a health responsibility, partly social services. But, you know, it's also about housing, it's about education, it's about workforce. So I think all of these things need to be combined to allow people to take more responsibility for their own health and well-being.
Do you have any specific concerns around the direction of travel for the NHS or for your trust in particular?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, I think that the big push that we're going to see is this thing called integrated care. And this is about trying to break the barriers down between different health organisations, between health and social care, and for everybody to work together to deliver this place-based care, i.e. care to patients and relatives and communities in their own settings, as opposed to in the big institutions. So of course the hospitals are always going to be there. Of course they need to be the best that they possibly can be. But I think we really need to work on this place-based agenda to keep people safe and out of hospital. And I think that's the real big push that's going to happen in health and social care going forward. And I think that's really important.
In the very near future, the Trust will embark upon an ambitious project, including fundraising, and you'll be asking the patients and the local community to support the ELHT&Me initiative. Could you tell us more about this initiative, and why do you think it's important for the community to get behind the project?
So we're linking this in with the 70th birthday of the NHS. It's 70th anniversary. And what we're saying is, if you look at Pennine, Lancashire, we cover, like I said, a massive population, nearly 600,000. And what we want to do is to raise everybody's awareness that there are things that we don't provide, we can never provide through the NHS. Some of the luxuries. And what we want to do is to engage with our communities to say, look, let's all engage together and let's have a real push. And our objective is to raise £1 million to invest in services within Pennine, Lancashire. So it's not going to be things that we would normally buy ourselves. It's going to be for some of the, I'll call them luxuries, but some of the really nice things that perhaps we wouldn't use NHS money for, but things that will help local communities and local people when they need them. So it's a really big push, and I think it's about everybody coming together. It's about all our communities coming together. It's about our staff coming together. It's about local businesses and industries all trying to support the NHS in this anniversary year.
Now, the Trust recently held a Super Sunday discharge event to free up beds for the forthcoming week. Can you tell us how that event went, and isn't there too much pressure on us all to discharge and free up beds?
So you're right, there is massive pressure on beds. If you think about some of the conversations we've had today about staffing and nursing levels and vacancies, we've only got so much capacity, then so many beds we can open. And because, as I said, people are coming into our services and living longer, but not necessarily healthier, there is continual pressure on the beds that we have. And so what we need to do is to get people discharged appropriately. So it is true that there's instances when people stay in hospital longer than they need to be. They're fit to go home, but for various reasons, administrative reasons such as the drugs not being dispensed on time or social care not being in place, people stay in hospital longer than they need to. So what this is about is trying to make sure that as soon as somebody comes into hospital, we have an expected date of discharge, and when people are ready to be discharged, physically ready to be discharged, they are discharged. Because you know what? Hospitals are not the best place for people to be. You should only be in hospital if you have acute illness or injury. But if you're fit to go home, it's much better for your health and well-being that you do go home. So the idea is to put things in place so that people can be discharged on a Sunday, the same as they would do the rest of the week. We've got to be careful we don't discharge people inappropriately, but that's not what it's about. It's about discharging people appropriately and having the facilities in place to be able to do that on a Sunday.
Let's just touch on something that you mentioned there about discharging inappropriately. I don't think perhaps many, we have spoken about it before, I know, but perhaps many people not be aware of the fact that you suffer quite heavy penalties if people are discharged inappropriately and then have to be readmitted. So it's not in the hospital's interest to do that.
It's not in the hospital's interest to do that financially, but it's also not in the hospital's interest just in terms of, what's right for the patients. We would never want to discharge patients inappropriately and then for them to come back into hospital a few days later because there's been a relapse. It's not good for patient care, it's not good for the hospital, and it involves more work for everybody. So we always try and make sure that we discharge patients only when it's safe and effective to do so. But it is true that sometimes it goes past that and people stay in hospital longer and they should go home sooner, and that's not a good place for anybody.
And let's face it, there is a huge amount of evidence to support the fact that people get better more quickly when they're in their own homes.
Oh, that's absolutely right. And you do get people that become institutionalised. People come into hospital, they become institutionalised, and then they find it very, very difficult then to readapt to normal life once they're discharged. So really, your hospital stay needs to be as short as is necessary.
And I know the hospital itself has done a huge piece of work around that by encouraging people to get dressed out of their pyjamas.
Yes, that absolutely, we call it PJ paralysis, and that's about, when people are in the daytime, if they're fit and well, even if they're going to stay in hospital that day, to get dressed, to move about as much as possible and to not stay within the hospital bed.
Last year, you teamed up with North Lincolnshire and Goole Foundation Trust, which had been placed in special measures. Could you tell us how that's going on?
So the work is going well. As you said, North Lincolnshire and Goole were an organisation that's actually in double special measure. That's both for quality and for finance. And we're supporting them looking at the quality improvement. So we've spent quite a lot of time with them. We've got a very detailed programme that we're supporting them with. And quite often it involves a number of their staff coming over to here, to either the Blackburn or the Burnley site, to see how we undertake things. So a couple of weeks ago, some of the senior nursing team from North Lincolnshire and Goole were over here spending time looking at our wards, looking at how our nursing undertake their business and taking back good practice. So it's going well. I think it's important that we spread good practice in the NHS, so we learn from other hospitals and other hospitals learn from us, and it's something I'm very supportive of.
And the Trust has launched another new safety initiative, this time called 10,000 Feet, where you'll be the first trust in the UK to adopt this safety approach. Could you tell us more about it and how will it help maintain patient safety?
So this is something based on a concept from the aviation industry, and it's one of our sort of senior staff within theatres, and what they've done is they've looked at how sort of safety works within the aviation industry, and one of the things there, hence the term sort of 10,000 feet, is that when things get really busy or really tense in anywhere in the aviation industry, anybody can almost call a timeout and say, right, everybody stop, everybody focus, everybody be quiet, let's really focus on this time that we've got now and the job in hand. And that's exactly what we've done in theatres. So you could be in a very busy theatre, there could be a lot of noise, could be a lot of work going on, but if somebody thinks that there needs to be more focus and more concentration, they can call 10,000 feet, time out, and everybody just focuses completely on what's going on. They stop any other work and everybody just has that complete focus, is the only way I can describe it, and it's meant to stop any accidents going on, and it's meant to help staff when they feel under pressure and want support from colleagues.
Sounds like a great initiative, and let's hope that other trusts across the country take it on board. Now, on your blog this week, you took the unusual step of using it to highlight the pitfalls of social media to raise issues and complaints. Why did you feel it was important to do this?
Well, unfortunately, you do get some people who raise complaints, some legitimate, some, I have to say, not legitimate at all, and they do it through social media, and that's wholly inappropriate. You know, we have a process that we can go through, and we will always listen. If people are not happy with the services that we're producing, we have a process that we can go through, and it's really important that we do listen to people when they've got concerns, and we capture that and we improve. But having a dialogue through social media where people can say what they want, and quite often say things that are wholly inappropriate and inaccurate, I think is really unfair, and it undermines staff, and it undermines staff confidence. So I did say a few words in my blog, because it's something I feel really passionate about, and I think people need to take responsibility and should not use social media inappropriately to raise concerns in this way, especially when they're unfounded, and especially when it's difficult for us to respond, because I will not enter a dialogue on social media in that way.
And let's face it, your complaints the number of your complaints has dropped dramatically over the years. And I think this, from my personal experience, has been because you tend to nip things in the bud more on the wards as these issues arrive.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, we will never get everything right. No health organisation will ever get everything completely right. There'll always be patients who think that are unhappy with their care, or relatives are unhappy with the care that their family have received. So what we try and do is, if anybody's got any concerns, we always try and talk to the patients or the relatives on the wards, in the department, when they're there, rather than let things build up and escalate and then have to deal with it in a formal complaint. So we are always scanning. We're always trying to find out if anybody has any concerns about what we do. We get most things right, but we will never get everything right, and it's important that we try and learn from that.
And one of the other things I suppose it would be fair to mention is that obviously you're not going to be available 24 hours a day. Is your senior team, was someone senior available to deal with complaints and issues as they arrive, even at the weekend?
Absolutely. There is always a director and senior manager and senior medic on call 24/7. And I'm not looking for any sympathy, because this is the best job in the world that I've got. But I am always available to the weekends, even holiday periods, to answer questions and respond to telephone calls, or to or respond to emails. So we are available. We always make sure that we can respond to things out of hours, because clearly healthcare is 24/7 and we work 24/7.
Now, later this month, you told us in your blog that the first 9 of your qualified physician associates will take up their posts in your medical and surgical divisions. Can you tell us more about those roles?
Clinical roles in the health service have always been changing, always been amending, and physicians associates are a new group of staff, fairly new group of staff in the NHS, and they are tend to be graduates, but not always, but people who have come in, who go through an intensive 2-year period of training, and they do work that supports doctors and supports nurses on the wards in direct patient care, and they are a really, really valuable area of workforce. So that they are people who didn't particularly want to be a nurse, or may not want to be a doctor, but somewhere sit a little bit between the two. And they are really, really, really important to our workforce of the future. And they're exciting roles.
I'd like to end all our blogs this year, as we always do, on a positive note and give you the final say. I'm going to call this section Reasons to be Cheerful, and I'm going to give you the platform to tell us your reasons to be cheerful this month, Kevin. So I've put you on the spot a little bit. It might be personal, it could be in your capacity as Chief Executive, whatever you decide. So, come on, Kevin, what are your reasons to be cheerful this month?
So every year we have a thing called the Staff Satisfaction Survey, and it's basically what staff are saying about their organisation. And I think it's the most important piece of information that any chief executive can look at, because If you've got staff who are motivated, where morale is good, they're focused on what they need to do, you will have better patient care and better patient services. Last year our staff satisfaction survey was really, really high. It was one of the best in the country. The staff satisfaction survey, the results for this year coming out at the end of February, and the very early indications are that again we're scoring incredibly high on the staff satisfaction survey, and that gives me real confidence for the future in terms of the services that we deliver and how we deliver them. And just to back that up, we have the flu vaccination that goes on every year. Last year we achieved 85% of all staff that were vaccinated, and we were the second best performer in the country. This year our figures are up to 92%. And I'm hoping that when it's all the calculations are finished, that's the highest vaccination rate in the country.
Reasons to be cheerful indeed. Kevin Mcgee, Chief Executive of East Lancashire Hospitals Trust, thank you for talking to the Patient Voices Group.
Thank you, Russ, as ever.
Now remember, questions for Mr Mcgee should be sent to the address at the end of the presentation. And a reminder please that we cannot deal with individual complaints, but if you have issues that affect staff or patients, then please, as ever, don't hesitate to get in touch. I'm Russ Mclean, and wherever your life journey takes you, have a safe trip.